Let's start.
Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. Good to see you back. Now, today and tomorrow, we're going to talk about the IPM practices, almond pests and diseases. I have this presentation, which I had included back in 2021. Last year, I had several diseases and pest issues. Then this time around, I added some more round the year practices on our actual farm. So this presentation is going to discuss what's actually going on right now at at the almond farms across California. So because I observed some diseases and pest issues in Georgia, so I have that. I already had that information on my slides. And then there are some others that, that are common across almond growing regions. So the first thing is the disclaimer that these round the year activities or IPM practices are based on research done in California and the university recommendations for California growers. Some of these pests, diseases, and other issues may or may not be present in Georgia, but some of the overall management strategies and monitoring techniques for good IPM practices should apply. So before we start a discussion on what's going on in California almonds, let me just first define IPM. A lot of people in the audience are already familiar with the concept of integrated pest management. But for the sake of record, let me just go through this. IPM is integrated pest management. This concept originated through the University of California studies back in the 1970s. After the second green revolution in California, a lot of pesticide applications were being done in California agriculture. And the university wanted to reduce the over-reliance on chemical control. So they developed this concept of integrated pest management. Basically, this concept is to combine or integrate a range of management strategies together, like biological control, cultural control, in addition to chemical control. This is done so that we don't just rely on chemical control. The goal for the integrated pest management is the long-term control of insect pests through the use of natural enemies, which is biological control, and cultural methods, and also selective pesticides. So over the last 50 years since the onset of the IPM program, in California, I can say that we have been able to reduce the reliance on chemical control, as well as the chemistries, the materials that we use for chemical control. We have been using softer and softer chemistries over recent years. To get a good IPM program, timely monitoring is the key. So we talked about monitoring in my previous lectures as well. So monitoring is basically keeping an eye on what's happening in your orchard so that you can take action ahead of time. In some cases, when you see a problem, when you see a disease or a pest pressure in the almond orchard, it's generally too late. But if you carefully monitor throughout the year, you can actually detect a slight activity and take preemptive action early on. Long-term reasons for adopting IPM. A biological control-based IPM is superior in the longer term because it actually regenerates the health of biological control agents like beneficial insects. and overall improves the health of the orchard. Key pests have developed resistance to a number of pesticides, so it helps to actually encourage the use of lesser pesticides and develop other methods for the control. Regulations, as well as the public demand and awareness, also calls for less pesticide usage. There is an issue of residue on produce. Residue lingers on produce, and in countries in Europe, in North America, and elsewhere, even in Asia, they are being increasingly aware. Food Quality Protection Act in the US basically calls for reducing the volatile organic compounds, the VOCs. IPM based on natural enemies and cultural control is effective against these issues. So what are the factors that affect the stability of the IPM program? Factors that can tip the balance in favor of pests, for example, weather. Weather is an important factor, and we know agriculture is a lot dependent on the weather conditions. So weather can quickly shift the patterns and tip the balance in favor of a certain pest. For example, here in California, in some cases, when there are scale populations, and those scaled populations are kept under check by the beetles. So in summer, when there is a lot of heat, the predatory beetles, they do not reproduce well. So there is no natural check. And because of that, the scale populations can quickly explode. Number two is introduction of invasive pests. When there is an invasive pest in an agriculture system, you may need to use pesticides, and many times the broad spectrum pesticides. And here's a good example, the brown marmorated stink bug. It is becoming a problem in California. I know the BMSB is a huge problem in Western Georgia, in hazelnuts. So basically, BMSB is a good example of an invasive pest, and there is no other control method established yet, and the only resource for the growers is to spray broad spectrum pesticides like pyrethroids, which harm the natural enemy populations. So these are the factors that can actually affect the stability of an IPM program. So what should be the considerations while we start a good IPM program? Regional differences should be our consideration, number one consideration. Every region has different climate and different weather patterns. So they could have different pest pressure. They could have different populations of natural enemies for that particular pest. So you need to keep in mind differences from region to region, and you cannot just copy an IPM program from one region and paste it to another. Influence of varieties. Some varieties are more sensitive to some pests or diseases than other varieties. So you need to keep in mind what variety you have. Tree health and canopy management. A lot depends on the overall way you prune, the overall way you manage your canopy, and the overall tree health. And neighboring crops. Many pests, particularly if you talk about almonds in California, many pests, they, for example, I'll give you an example of leaf-footed plant bug or stink bugs. So these plant bugs, they fly longer distances and they fly from crop to crop looking for their food. So in California, we have a smaller acreage and there are a lot of diverse crops growing in a smaller region like the Central Valley. So a pest like a stink bug or a leaf-footed bug, they find around the year crops For example, when the almonds are harvested, pistachios are harvested, they go to pomegranates because pomegranates are on the tree. So they feed on the pomegranate fruits and then hibernate during the winter time. When they come out of winter in early spring, usually almonds are their first choice. So they invade the almond crop in huge numbers. And once the almond crop is hardened, they can no longer pierce the shells. Then they go to pistachios because pistachios are still soft and developing. So they can jump from crop to crop. So neighboring crop in an overall region agricultural system, you need to keep that in mind. And then the number one rule of thumb in a good IPM program is avoid broad spectrum pesticides, because a good IPM program is about encouraging biological control, and biological control agents are friendly insects that eat or kill our pests. They are the most critical part, and they can get killed if we use a broad spectrum pesticide. Okay. So using selective pesticides that allow natural enemies to survive while only targeting a narrow range of pest type or population. Longevity of residual effect of pesticides differ from each other. So they can, some pesticides can give you longer residual periods, but then at the same time, they will cause a disturbance in the natural ecosystem of beneficial insects and biological control agents for a longer period of time. So you need to keep that in mind. Broad spectrum pesticides may be selective by using a low rate. So in a lot of university trials are done by controlling the rate to see what is the minimum threshold that's needed to control a particular pest. And there could be some low rate or low volumes that can actually act as selective pesticide and still spare the beneficial insects. So the rule of thumb is avoid using broad spectrum or use the most selective insecticide early in the season to help build natural enemy populations. Insecticide strategies at the start of the season. Excuse me. Natural enemies are just coming out of dormancy, so avoid using broad spectrum pesticides. Same is true at the end of the summer. Okay, so early on, if you use softer chemistries, narrow range and selective pesticides, it gives time for the natural enemies or beneficial insects to establish in the orchard. The second thing is to apply at a lower rate when possible. I wrote it when possible. Okay, this is really critical because you need to be mindful also that if you use a rate lower than recommended for a prolonged period of time, that can also actually do more harm than good, because it can help the insect pest develop resistance to that particular pesticide. So I'm not talking about using the lower rate than the minimum recommended dose or making up your own rate. Follow the recommendation, but you can still choose to use the lower recommendation if possible. That would make it selective. You can treat only a part of the orchard that has high pest pressure. That's also a good strategy. Sometimes you don't need to treat the whole area. Reducing the frequency of applications. Natural enemies can recover after one application, but they can't survive multiple applications in a row. Okay, so you have to be very careful when you spray, what you spray, and how much you spray. And keep in mind, the natural enemies of the pests, the biological control agents, they are a longer term solution. So we need to build their population. Okay. So this is the last slide on the IPM, then we will get into the almonds annual cycle. Strategies that maximize the effectiveness of natural enemies, dust, manure, gypsum, or kaolin clay, they all reduce the effectiveness of parasitoids. And we have to actually spray some of these. For example, the kaolin clay is sprayed for protection from heat stress. And in winter months, in some of the crops, we also spray from the winter season or sunburn protection. In almonds and other nut crops, the kaolin clay, which is commonly sold under the brand name of Surround, it actually is sprayed in summer months to help the trees with heat stress, reducing the heat stress. Other things that create dust, like the normal dust from the orchard floor or manure or the gypsum, they all make a coating on the leaves, and that reduces the effectiveness of the parasitoids, which means the effectiveness of the natural enemies. And it depends on the weather in the region or the overall ecosystem. We went to Australia 5 years ago, and I was surprised to see the almond orchard, and the leaves look like in their summer, the leaves look like they're washed with water and soap. They were so fresh and green and clean because they were out in the desert where there was a lot of brush and there was no open sand or no high winds, and they were isolated. In California, it was striking to me because in California, we cannot get that kind of a system. Our almond trees, they are loaded with dust, and dust from all these agents throughout the season. So you will also see the difference in an orchard which is in high elevations and in isolated conditions or regions that will have lesser of these issues. So there would be a better chance of establishing the natural enemies. Okay, so this is the reason why the dusty edges of the orchard have the most scale, because the dust cover gives the scale good chance of being active. So we water the dusty roads throughout the season. Here, the Agriculture Department of the United States and the state of California, they gave grants to the growers to, there are so many different grants. There's so much funding for these things. And one of the fundings is for spraying the dusty roads. They have an oil emulsion, basically some oil-based solutions that you can actually spray. They are heavier because if you spray just the water in the heat of the summer, you have to keep spraying through the season. But this oil-based material, if you spray on your walkways, on your driveways, on the roads, it actually tamps the water down for a longer period of, tamps the sand down for a longer period of time. So it helps reduce the dust. Then pruning to promote an open canopy that reduces humidity. It actually helps the natural enemies to thrive. And then planting a cover crop may help in biological control because there could be some beneficial insects that will get harbored, that will take shelter in a cover crop. Okay, let's go into the seasonality of the almonds. In California, we have different seasons, we have split seasons. So we divide the almond annual cycle in 5 different periods of growth. I will start with dormant season because this is where we were just before when we met in January. We were in the dormant to late dormant season. Now we are in bloom to post-bloom season as we are speaking here. The next comes fruit development, then harvest and post-harvest. Let's take up dormant or late dormant season tasks. Dormant is January, late dormant is around first week of February. I will talk about our California situation in the next few slides. This year, it's an interesting year. A lot of things are already happening in our scenarios, and that could be a guideline for you as well on what could go wrong. So the tasks during the dormant or late dormant season, we generally focus on pest management. We have scales, soft scales. We have scab issue that we need to control. So we keep on monitoring for diseases. During the late dormant season, we need irrigation. This year we needed irrigation because it was a dry winter for California. So before bloom, we need to actually make sure that your soil moisture is optimum. And then the winter season task, one of the important tasks is pruning because when the trees are dormant, pruning is done at that time. Winter irrigation, if rainfall is low during the winters, yes, you need to irrigate. In California, this year, we had a big storm in November. Soil moisture was good, the soil profile was filled. And then a month later, we had a huge storm and during the Christmas holidays, end of December, there was like several feet of snow on the mountains. It rained for a couple of days in a row, and then it stopped. And that was it for the season. In 2022, we have yet to see a big rainstorm. Our January went dry. So we needed to have irrigation in the end of January. Okay, so I will talk more about that in a few minutes. Because the almond trees do not have leaves during the winter time, so they do not do transpiration as high as they do in summer, but they still need to use some water because there is living tissue on the trees. In California, we have the crop coefficient in December as 0.3, and the evapotranspiration in December is 0.12, which is basically the evapotranspiration happening from the tree's structure, the shoots, the branches. So it's not zero. Water needs are specific for your orchard location and other factors. So a good strategy is to check the soil moisture status. If needed, you irrigate in shorter sets to avoid soil saturation because you never know when the next rainstorm is coming. But before you enter the bloom period, you need to fill the soil profile and bring the soil to field capacity. That's a general recommendation. Okay. Why the soil profile needs to be filled with water before bloom? There are a couple of things, and we experienced those issues this year. If you have water stress, continued water stress in dormancy, it can delay bloom. Okay, so if you have severe water stress, it can delay bloom, or it can even, cause the flowers to fall prematurely, leading to lower pollination. Okay, and that fortunately does not happen in California because we still have some water, underground water that we can pump and apply to the trees. And another good reason to apply water before bloom is that the almond tree's root growth flush, the first root growth flush, happens in late January, just before bloom. So the trees start making their fine feeder roots in late January, early February, and then they actually express flowers in mid-January, mid-February. That's the timeline in California. So whatever the timeline is, in Georgia, for example, it's late blooming cultivars, blooming in mid-March. Then before the bloom time, the trees wake up from the sleep and they actually get into developing their new roots for the season. Okay, so that's the good reason to fill the soil profile to help in root growth, which will help in nutrient uptake through the season. So what happened in January, February 2022 in California? We had a dry winter, no rain in January and no rain in first half of February. So the soil moisture was very low. So physiologically, if you, some of you are familiar with this, if you stress a tree for water for a few days or a few weeks, and then all of a sudden apply good amount of water, the tree expresses, the bloom all of a sudden. Okay, this is a strategy that is used to push the flowers or push bloom in so many crops. One good example is research done in California on lemons. Lemons, sometimes because lemon is a moderate season, moderate climate crop, lemons are grown near the coast where the weather stays same throughout the year. It's moderate. There is no frost or there is no high heat of the summer. So that's the reason the lemons actually in California, they tend to flower all year round. So you can see the flowers in January, February, even in June and July, and then, all through the year scattered flowering. For a commercial operations, this is not good. For a home garden, it's really good. You get to have lemons and fruits like that all year round. But if you have a commercial operation, then you are into hiring labor all the year round. So you need to push the flower at one particular time, or at least two major flowering flushes, one in January and another in August, for example. So there was research done in California that in order to make the lemon trees bloom at one time and push all the blooms together at one time, they use this strategy of water stress. They stressed the trees for a couple of weeks in a row. And when the soil moisture stress was built good enough, then they put a good amount of water, they irrigated the field, and the trees bloomed all of a sudden together. So that's exactly what happened this year. This year, the bloom came so quickly. It was one of the earliest blooms. Even the second week of February, on February 7th, February 7th, we were just at, late dormant or pink bud stage. And February 10th, we were almost at full bloom. We were at 60% bloom. So that's how quickly the bloom came this year. And the bloom window was really short. So that's one of the concerns in California, that this year the bees might not get enough time to work on the flowers. Although the weather for the first part of the bloom remained dry, there was no rain, but the bloom window was so short and all the flowers opened so quickly, and with the same number of beehives per acre, we might not have a sufficient bloom industry-wide. And then the freeze came this week. If you're following California ag news, yesterday and today, there are frost warnings in many areas. This is, now it's 7:34 in the morning. And this morning I'm receiving, messages from different growers. And at some places, the temperatures dropped to -4. Actually, there was just a few reports of -4, -3 was common, -3 degrees Celsius. So the trees are at full bloom, and not at full bloom even because we're past bloom now. The trees were at full bloom last week. So we are at the nut set stage, and that stage is really, really sensitive. The chart on the right shows how the almond trees would respond to frost at different stages of growth. This is data from the old cultivars like Peerless and Knee Plus and Mission, which are no longer in production. Non-Pearl is our major cultivar. So if you see, this is basically percentage, 10, 20, 75, 100 is the percentage of the flowers or the nuts that get affected. Okay, so pink bud stage, out of these 3 stages, going from pink bud to full bloom to the small nut, the pink bud stage is the most hardy stage to frost. Okay, then full bloom stage is relatively more sensitive than pink bud, and then when the small nuts are set, that stage is really, really sensitive. So we got 2 issues this year: a very short window of bloom and very quick onset of bloom, followed by a major hard freeze at the stage when the small nut is being set. So, for example, if you are at a small nut set stage, even the temperature at 27 degrees, which is -3, between -2 and -3, almost half to 100% of your nuts or flowers could be affected if they are exposed to these temperatures for at least 30 minutes. Okay, pruning in relation to the integrated pest management. Pruning is really important. We talked about that in detail, but here I'm talking about pruning for pest management and disease management. We prune the trees when there is no rain in the forecast. That gives us enough time for the pruning wounds to heal and avoid any fungal infestation. Because fresh pruning wounds plus rain plus warmer days can lead to fungal infection at the pruning wound. We usually, if we take care of this consideration when there's dry period, and we prune and leave the pruning wound open for at least 14 days, the pruning wounds heal on their own. So we do not need any sealant. However, if you don't get a break in the weather, in the rainy weather, and it's continuously raining intermittently every week, then you may need to apply some kind of sealant to avoid that injured portion being infected. So another rule in pruning is do not wait to prune. Do not wait a couple of years to prune a limb. So keep an eye on your trees every year and prune them at the right stage. If you let some of the branches grow, which you could have pruned early on, and when the branches grow big and then you decide to prune, the bigger is the diameter of the branch that you're cutting, the more chances are that they will get infected with the fungal, because it all depends on the area of the cut portion, right? So if a grower does a good job on annual maintenance pruning early on, or developing the framework in year 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And they are cutting the branches as they are growing, smaller branches. They are also avoiding any likelihood of fungal infection to the major limbs of the tree. So integrated pest management. From this slide, I split the first point in so many slides early on, talking about the IPM program. However, to stress, this is not enough to stress on monitoring. In California, we put a lot of emphasis on monitoring. So monitoring is the key, keeping an eye and detecting the problem when it is just starting. Okay, scale. I'm basically listing these. I will be jumping from pests and diseases, and then again talking about pests, and then again talking about diseases. That is because my layout for this talk is going by the season. So seasonality is what we are discussing in here. So I will talk about the diseases and pests. European fruit lick. Different scales in California almonds. San Jose scale may have white or brown cap. It has a yellowish body. Usually use dormant oil or there's a chemical spray, pyriproxyfen, that we can actually spray along with oil to control the scale at the dormant stage when there are no leaves on the tree. Walnut scale actually appears in daisy-shaped groups and appears more on monorays. So even for the scales and smaller pests, different cultivars are sensitive in a different way. So to actually look for the scales and other issues during the dormant season, we do the dormant spur sampling in case of almonds. The university recommendation is that we do the sampling of the spurs in the winter months to determine the need for a dormant treatment. Sampling is done once between mid-November and January when the trees are dormant. It is extensive. It's a laborious and time-consuming job. It may cause a lot of work, but it reduces the operating cost because it helps us in early detection of these issues, and we can nip these in the bud. We can do some spray applications which are more economical, like copper and oil, or other softer chemistries like chlorothalonil. We can spray those during the dormant season so that we don't need to use harder chemistries and more number of sprays in the season. So usually the dormant spur sampling and the softer sprays early on reduce the spray applications later in the season. So for dormant spur sampling, we need to check for these insect pests. We need to check for the mite eggs, the brown mite and the European red mite. San Jose scales, we need to check for those, European fruit licanium. And then we also need to check for insect predators. We need to check for any parasitized scales, which means that there are scale remainings or the coverings of the scale without the pest inside because the pest has already been eaten by the predators. So we need to check on that. That will give us a good indication of the natural control. So for example, if you have less actual scale and more parasitized scale on your branches, that means your parasites are doing a good job and you don't need to do a spray. So you need to do this sampling to make a decision. How to sample? Typically, we sample 35 to 50 trees from each orchard. Each orchard is, we typically have 50 or 40 acre block. So we do the recommendation on a 40 acre block, and selecting 35 to 50 trees is usually good. Selecting major scaffolds randomly, clip 2 to 3 spurs or twigs from inside the canopy so that you have a total of about 100 twigs or spurs in your bucket. Okay. So clip the spur off at the base, making sure to include some old spur wood along with last year's growth. And then put them in a bucket and then just come to your workplace and or field office and then sit there and using a hand lens, examine 20 of the spurs for scales, mite eggs, and scab lesions at a time. Okay, scab is another important summertime disease, which usually we can detect during the winter time. So if you have scab lesions, and scab lesions you can see with the naked eye, but you will need a hand lens to look for the scales, parasitized scales, and look for the mite eggs. So you examine those, and the university has given a table to see how you make your treatment decisions. So you write your percentages on a piece of paper, and this is a chart that I got from the UCIPM website. They have actually built the threshold levels. For example, if you have San Jose scale and your spur sampling tells you that it's below 20% on your spurs, then you don't need to do any spray. If there is 20 to 60%, then oil can be sprayed, horticultural oil at 6 to 8 gallons per acre. And then if it's over 60%, then you can use an insect growth regulator along with the oil. So these are for the top 3 are for the insect pests. And the last one is for the scab. If you see scab infestation in less than 10% of the spurs, you don't need a spray. But if you have 10% or more spurs infected with scab, then we recommend spraying copper or oil or chlorothalonil or oil and oil. So these are the black caps of San Jose scale. The 4 round dark scales in the center are the black cap stage, the most common overwintering form. Okay, so this white cap stage is the earlier stage that is on the left here. This is the overwintering stage. European red mite eggs. So here are these eggs. Masses of eggs may be laid together, each slightly flattened. Red egg has a long spine-like projection called the stipe. If you look closely, they have a little spine or a little hair-like projection. Okay, so you can see it with the hand lens. Here are the brown mite eggs. Here are the adults of brown mite, and then there are eggs, these brownish red looking round things. Basically, they look like the eggs of the European red mite, but they lack the stipe. This is European fruit licanium. This is a legless, immobile, yellow insects on twigs. Excuse me, just a second. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So, so these are, legless, immobile, yellow insects, and they are like a raised scab on a on the twigs. So So there are older nymphs that may have brown markings and a distinct center ridge. Okay. They are easy to identify if they are on the tree. These are the nymphs of European fruit licanium. These yellow ones are, the nymphs, alive nymphs, and this center one, which is turning black, that is basically being parasitized. So now you can easily see that parasites are working, but you still have a lot more lives. So if you see more of the parasitized ones, that means your natural enemies are working hard. This is almond scab. This is a serious disease of the summertime. However, it is best detected during the dormant season. These are the oil-soaked lesions, like as if you have a droplets of oil on the twigs, and you can easily detect these lesions on the twigs. And if you have this over the threshold, you can spray copper and oil. For other pests, spider mites, the overwintering female mites are red or orange colored and are found under rough almond bark or in the ground litter or on winter weeds. Adult males are not present in the winter. Okay, so this is the spider mite. Okay, other aspects of the IPM during the dormancy is we have the navel orange worm. In Georgia, you don't have this pest in the almonds yet. But looking at the regions and suitability, the pest pressure in California based on the temperatures, unfortunately, there are regions in Georgia that could be suitable. The only difference is that in many almond growing regions in Georgia, there are a lot more colder and more freezing events, and that might help us by eliminating the overwintering larvae, because these larvae of navel orange worm overwinter on the mummy nuts, which are hanging on the tree. So there could be some climatic conditions that could favor the control of, or that could favor the growers and help this, basically stop, or even if it's introduced, it might not establish well. But we need to, watch out for any infestations of an invasive pest like this. In California, this is already established and it's a big problem. It's #1 pest of economic importance in California nut crops. So in addition to in-season sprays, we do mummy shaking or orchard sanitation in the winter months. So mummy nuts are the nuts that actually stay sticking to the tree for a longer period after harvest, and those nuts are favored food of the navel orange worm larvae. And the navel orange worm, when they have a flight, when they fly during the season, they lay eggs on the hulls and the cracked, split shells, the sutures. They lay eggs at those places, and when the eggs hatch and the larvae come out, the larva had like a nut inside the kernel that they eat throughout the winter season. So these overwintering larvae need to be destroyed in order to reduce the in-season pressure. So we mummy shake the nuts, and all the mummy nuts, they fall on the ground, and then we disc the orchard floor to mix the mummy nuts in. Okay, so during bloom time, this is, I will skip this because this actually does not talk about the IPM. I had a few slides. of bloom time in general, like the hive conditions and beehives. So I'll skip and jump to the bloom time disease management. So you have already seen this disease triangle. So for a disease to happen, we need 3 conditions to be met. 1, we need the pathogen. Then we need a susceptible host or a susceptible stage of a particular host. And then 3rd, we need a conducive environment. Most of these pathogens that we talk about in the bloom time diseases or in general, in season diseases in almonds, we have the pathogens present in the orchard system, okay? But during the bloom time, we get a susceptible host stage. The blooms, the flower petals contain a lot of sugars. So that is really, really favored by the fungi. And during the bloom time, the temperatures are just warming up. The temperatures are getting to a place where they are higher than 15 degrees Celsius or 13 to 15 degrees Celsius and above. And most of the times there is moisture in the air because of the rainy season or because of the irrigation practices just starting. So the conducive environment creates a problem at the bloom time. In almonds, the bloom time diseases basically occur a lot during this time because of these 3 reasons. For the disease control, it depends on 3 things. 1 is the fungicide used. In case of California almonds, we almost always have a fungicide program for the bloom time sprays. So the control depends on the fungicide used because every fungicide has a different residual time, different level of control. And then the timing, it really depends on the timing when you are spraying in relation to the fungal infection. And the 3rd thing is the coverage. The coverage of the fungicides across the tree canopy is really important. So we have some new technology sprayers that improve coverage. And then the overall weather conditions will dictate the timing of the fungicide spray. Generally, the method is to assess the diseases, again, monitoring. You keep on monitoring and see the disease potential, and then you select the fungicide based on that. I will show you the chart that the University of California's IPM website displayed about the fungicide effectiveness and the fungicide timings. So we select the fungicide based on the diseases and the timings of their effectiveness. We also recommend rotating the fungicides to reduce fungicide resistance development. I'm sure you will have also access to the fungicide resistance management action committees or the literature on fungicide resistance and their management. So keep that in mind, that applying the same fungicide over and over again to control the same fungi will actually help develop the resistance to that fungicide in that fungi. So you need to rotate the chemistries because different chemistries have different modes of action. So to reduce the resistance, we need to rotate the chemistries. In California, a typical bloom spray is done. The first bloom spray is done at 5 to 20% bloom. And the second bloom spray is done at 80%, which is 80% to full bloom. This year was a dry year, so nobody did early spray at 5% or 20% bloom, but everybody still did one spray at 80% bloom. In a dry year like this, you can just get away with one full bloom spray, which we did this year. So these are the bloom time diseases. Top three are the brown rot, then short hole, and jacket rot. Jacket rot comes right after the nut set starts. And then there are spring and summertime diseases like scab, rust, anthracnose, alternaria. So we will talk about them one by one. Brown rot blossom blight, it's a serious disease of the bloom. It is caused by Monilinia laxa and sometimes caused by Monilinia fructicola as well. It infects the anthers and pistils and moves into the spurs and kills the spurs. And then from there, it can move into the shoot and cause the shoot dieback. Under severe infestations, it can actually lead to a major crop loss. All varieties of the almonds grown in California are susceptible, but Butte and Carmel are the most susceptible. And these two cultivars are susceptible because they form tight clusters. So watch for your cultivar that you are growing, that variety, if it has tight clusters, then it might be more sensitive to the brown rot. Because these are fungi that you can find in your production system as well. So they can even cause infection without the rains, because in a sensitive cultivar, even when you have dewdrops present in the morning, with that much of a moisture, a susceptible cultivar can actually get this disease on the bloom. The fungus survives in twig cankers and on remaining diseased flower parts and spurs, and it can actually carry over for a longer period of time. So here was a condition in a Butte orchard of Butte cultivar, which is sensitive because of tight clusters. When in a trial, it missed a bloom, full bloom brown rot spray. It had over 50% blossom blight despite no rain, just because of the morning time dewdrops. Green fruit rot or jacket rot, it's caused by three different fungi: Botrytis cinerea, Monilinia laxa, and Sclerotinia sclerotiorum. The timing of infection is from opening of the flower to petal fall. The symptoms of this are observed later. Basically, the jacket that is withering away after the nut set. Now the nut is developing, but this jacket is the scales from the flower. They are remaining, and they just hang in there for a little bit and create a situation where they can trap some moisture, and just a little bit moisture, even a drop or a few drops of moisture trapped in this withering tissue can actually cause this fungus to thrive and cause the jacket rot that could eventually lead to dropping of the fruit if not treated in time. Again, the cultivars that form tight clusters like Butte and Carmel, they are more susceptible. Almond short hole, I observed this pathogen, this disease in Georgia almonds. Short hole is also a serious problem that can be persistent in the orchard from year to year. You can see the spots on leaves, fruits, twigs, and flowers. I have rarely seen this much infection on a fruit in California, and that is because farmers here are aware of this problem and they do a good job in monitoring and around the year control of this issue. Okay, so this is on the leaf. So basically the lesions of the fungus are surrounded by black tissue, which is basically a mass of dying cells. And this is the plant's way of quarantining the fungus so that the fungus does not spread beyond this spot. So eventually that leads to this whole thing falling off and dying because of the tissue being dead. And it creates holes. That's why it's named short holes. So you can also see the fruit spots if they're not, if the infection is not controlled. Heavy infection of young fruit and causes fruit drop or distortion and gumming. We typically apply zinc sulfate, heavy dose of zinc sulfate, 20 to 40 pounds an acre. That is roughly, 20 to 35 kilograms per hectare. In late October to early November, that speeds up the leaf fall so that all the inoculum that is built on the leaves, it actually drops on the ground. Otherwise, if you have high inoculum on the leaves, the fungal spores, they survive on the twigs after leaf fall, and it overwinters, and the next spring, it appears on the leaves again. In season, we have the fungicide programs. So in season, we recommend doing the fungicide sprays to keep it under control. Bacterial blast is a fungus, is a bacteria that actually has recently been a problem in many almond orchards, particularly during a wet season. In a cold, wet, late dormant season, especially during the bloom time or when the conditions are wet, I have seen in a lot of orchards here around Fresno that this bacterial disease, caused by Pseudomonas, it actually takes over and causes this blast type appearance on the leaves. So basically on the flowers. So basically the flowers actually wither and die. And this is, we saw so many incidences in the last 2 years in California. And this is a hard disease to control if it comes to your orchard once. So you have to be proactive. And this year, I know a farmer who had this problem in 2019. His whole crop got affected because of bacterial blast, because 2019 was a wet bloom time. It was raining all the time during the bloom. So this time, earlier this week, I met him and he had already sprayed Cocide, which is a bactericide, chemical. So he had sprayed Cocide and hoping to get rid of bacteria. But the first infection was in 2019, it's 2022. So he still has to keep on spraying. And he also does a very good job on copper applications and following up on copper applications and other bacterial, antibacterial applications. So it's a hard disease to get rid of if you have a severe infection in your orchard. Okay, other than the navel orange worm, now we are moving into the in-season pests and diseases. Okay, right after fruit set, we have a major problem with peach twig borer, the scales, mites, the mealybug, and then we have plant bugs, stink bug, leaf-footed bug, and then we have the brown marmorated stink bug as well. And then the post fruit set and in season late spring to summer diseases are anthracnose, almond scab, and almond rust. Let's talk about anthracnose first. Anthracnose is again a serious disease which is hard to get rid of if it shows up in your orchard. The infected nuts, they show round, orange, sunken lesions on the hull. So you can see one in the center where I'm pointing. This is the sunken lesion and orange in color. Okay, Symptoms typically appear 3 weeks after petal fall, and then the nuts show profuse gumming on the sites of infection. And one important thing to note is that in case of almond anthracnose, the gum is amber colored, the brown colored gum. Okay, that's a typical symptom. We see clear gum on almond hulls, and clear gum is usually a response to the piercing, sucking insect pests like stink bugs or ligus or leaf-footed bugs. When they puncture the soft shell, then there is clear gum on the nut. If you see the brown colored gum, this is usually anthracnose. Almond scab, we talked about this picture on the lower right, where almond scab shows up during the dormant season. If it's not treated in time, you can have this gray to black looking oil-soaked lesions on the fruit. This is a severe infestation on the fruit on the left. The young leaf lesions are indistinct, small yellow specks. They are best seen a leaf holding up to the light. Lesions usually are not visible until late spring or early summer, and it expresses in late spring to early summer if it's not controlled and monitored during the dormant spur sampling. Almond rust is another serious disease in almonds, and it again is typically seen in high moisture areas in summer. We typically have no rains in summer, so we don't have high moisture areas in orchards. However, when there is an orchard by a canal, a body of water, or there is a pond that has water vapors evaporating from the water surface, that excess moisture actually helps this fungus develop. Typical symptoms is on the underside of the leaves. It starts with brown lesions, brown reddish lesions on the underside of the leaf. And then they also later they appear as yellow spots on the upper surface of the leaf. Rust is such a serious disease that it defoliates the tree so quickly. So if there is a rust infestation on the leaves, by the time the harvest comes, sometimes there is early defoliation. If not, then when the trees are shaken during the harvest, the trees are so infected that they fall. And that's a bigger loss because now there are no leaves to photosynthesize, and the next year's crop is going to be affected. Bacterial spot of almonds caused by Xanthomonas arboricola. The variant is prunei. It affects the leaves, twigs, and fruits of most prunus species. Bacterial spot is a relatively new disease that we have seen in a lot of almond orchards in Australia, but it was recently detected in some cultivars in California. Fritz and Padre were the most susceptible varieties, and I saw first bacterial spot infestations in 2015. Suspected to come from some international source. And bacterial spot is the reason that Fritz variety is no longer in cultivation. All the Fritz orchards since then, most of them are already been pulled out. And because Fritz was so susceptible to bacterial spot, it has severe infestations really quickly. So you can look like you can look at the symptoms. Symptoms may resemble symptoms of anthracnose, but you will have profuse gumming coming out of the nut, and also the bacterial spot infestations on the leaf look like brownish to yellow lesions, specks on the leaf. So they can be confused with anthracnose, just like I said, but there are slightly different lesions. In case of anthracnose, you can see the lesion type, and in case of bacterial spot, they're smaller and they're more scattered. And they also have distinctively different leaf lesions. Bacterial spot of almonds can also cause a widespread nut drop on almonds. So you can look at the orchard floor from an orchard affected by bacterial spot. So bacterial spot also overwinters in the mummies and potentially on the bud scars. So again, monitoring during the winter months and removal of mummies is really important. In chemical management of bacterial spot, so far in California, the university recommends delayed dormant application with mancozeb and copper. And then we can have in-season applications of copper and copper mancozeb. Halving of copper rates every successive application is recommended. So basically, what that means is every time you repeat the copper application, you use half the rate that you used previously, because using the same rate of copper going into the season can cause toxicity. So if you are using early in the season, use the full rate, and then next time use the half of that rate, and the following time use the half of that rate, and keep on reducing. In California, a mid-March spray, which is like a spray at this stage of fruit development, copper plus mancozeb sprays at first at dormant and then mid-March was effective. So bacterial leaf spot is different from bacterial spot, and that's not a major concern in California. It can cause minor leaf drop associated with one particular cultivar. It's not the same as bacterial blast, but appears in similar conditions like rainy, cool weather. Now, before I end my discussion for today, and we'll actually pick it up from here tomorrow, because this is going to be an hour and a half. So I will show you these charts from the University of California's IPM program. For the key diseases and their management, we have this chart that we follow, and they have listed the treatment timings, and the number of pluses, the maximum number of pluses means maximum effectiveness of the spray at that particular time. And as the number of plus signs gets reduced, that means the effectiveness gets reduced. And negative, this bar means it's not effective. For example, alternaria leaf spot is a summertime disease. It comes later in June and July. So spraying during May and June is effective. Spraying early on during bloom or spring is not effective. On the other side, blossom blight, the brown rot, that is actually a bloom time disease. So we talked about a full bloom spray, that is most effective time. And if you spray for this disease later in the season in spring and summer, it's not effective. So this is a good chart, a reference chart to help control these diseases based on the timings. Of course, the timings can vary depending on the location, the site, and variety characteristics and all the things. Still, this can function as a good guide. Other is one is they list the fungicides that are approved and have almonds on label for California. They list the fungicides that have different fungicide resistance action group number. So they're grouped by number. based on their mode of action, and different number means different modes of action. So, and they have the basically different risks of resistance. Okay, so the number is written in the brackets, and the risk of developing resistance is written here in this column. So fungicide, the brand name, their risk of resistance, and their group number based on their FRAC rating, and then what disease they are usually effective for, most effective for. Okay, and ND means no data. ND means that this fungicide has not been tested for effectiveness in this disease. So I have, in this case, I have this list. It continues and continues further. So, there are a lot of different chemistries, different levels of resistance in terms of resistance management, and different levels of effectiveness. We can go into details and search for the recommended fungicides in Georgia and incidence of diseases, which diseases are more common in Georgia. I saw a couple of diseases like short hole last year. So, it's all about, doing some research, local based specific research to see which material would be effective for what disease in Georgian conditions. With this, I stop here because it's already been a long time that I'm speaking. So now I will open the session for questions and discussions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Garrett.
მადლობა გარეთ.
შეკითხვები თუ გვაქვს აბა?
I'm not hearing the
მე თარგმანის ფუნქცია არ მაქვს. აიხეჭერდა. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Good.
Yeah, right.
It was stuck. Good morning, your time. It's morning. It's my pleasure to meet you again. Of course, it was very interesting to listen to these slides. And of course, I have questions. I have the following question. You were presenting a scheme here. We have different approaches in Georgia on the intensity of the interventions and timings. The table that you showed us, what would you recommend to us from this? Should we have a schedule, a calendar of spraying, or should we act ad hoc when we spot and when we detect a disease, only that?
Okay, so the question is about adapting to the Georgian conditions, based on the incidence of diseases and the effectiveness of sprays and when to spray, right? So, this is a really important topic and a sensitive one. So what I would recommend is at least looking at your recommendations, or I know that there is a need to do a lot of research based on local conditions and levels of infestation of a disease. But where you can start is, basically on-farm trials is one way to see the effectiveness. So in the absence of any formal recommendations by the experts or any university or research station in Georgia, I think the best way to move forward would be to follow some of the guidelines that we have developed, and then try using the recommended rates on your crop based on your monitoring. So I would lay a really, really high stress on your monitoring in this case, because you do not have a recommendation of a particular fungicide in your crop, so you do not want to spray when it's not needed. So I would say that you can take some guidance from the guidelines developed in California, the effectiveness of these fungicides for those particular diseases, but monitoring is the key. And as soon as you see some diseases, infestations, you can, for many of these diseases, there is no threshold level, particularly in season. So if you see some disease here and there, if you see that, you see symptoms, you can actually do preemptive sprays.
Thank you, understood. I have another question. On copper, I have a question on copper.
Mm-hmm.
I was using copper, and do you know what happened with leaves? As if they were burning at the edges.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, they had the dots and gaps. Then I reduced the dose, but still I had the same impact on leaves. Last year, for instance, I didn't use any copper. I did not apply any copper. But on the contrary, I had some fungus and diseases. So I couldn't figure out whether to use copper or not. What's your recommendation on this?
Using copper is typically, it depends on the stage of the tree. Using copper in season can cause phytotoxicity. So yeah, I know that has been an issue here. That's the reason the university here recommends, reducing the rates of copper as you go into the season. It can cause burning. Okay. There are some different formulations of copper that you can actually look for, but I would say look at the rate of copper, and then look at the resistance to copper in what you're trying to control. So there could be some resistance to copper as the fungi and bacteria that you try to control. It can develop resistance to copper as well. So you need to look for those signals, and of course control your rate of spray if you go in season. During the dormant season, it's the safest to spray, and as the season progresses, you go into the season, copper spray, heavy dose of copper can cause phytotoxicity. Okay, so we have a question.
Understood, thank you. And one more, if I may.
Okay, sure.
In this period, at present in Georgia, and not in California, because you are more advanced, and you start blooming much earlier. In Georgia, I had this blue treatment with oil and copper, a solution. I wonder what you think. To what extent it's essential at this point in time? We are getting spurs right yet. No blooming started yet.
Okay, so basically you're talking about late dormant copper and oil spray, right? So yeah, it depends on it depends on your monitoring. A lot of growers, if they have seen scales last year, if they have scale infestations in their orchards in the previous years, okay, they typically apply oil. Okay. Also for the bacterial infestations, doing a dormant to late dormant copper and oil application helps keep the bacterial population, copper applications help keep the bacterial populations under check. So it's a user recommendation, a preemptive measure that some of the growers apply. But again, it depends on the level of inoculum or level of infestation as well. So based on your monitoring, if you think that you had mite infestation or bacterial infestations in the past, then I would definitely recommend a copper and oil application before bloom.
That is, at this point in time, it's a must, right? Before blooming, right?
Before blooming, yes. If you have past infestations, and then it is recommended in the late term. Yeah. Okay, so I have one question in the chat. Can we all see this? The question from Miriam: will there be any problem if we harvest almonds by hand when crops are young and still with hull? Before almond core is formed, will it lessen next year's yield? Okay, so basically you are, the question is about actually removing the nuts or removing the crop from the young trees, right?
No, the question is about when we remove a young with hull green almonds that are still in hull and core isn't formed yet.
Okay.
Not the young trees, just young almond crop.
Right. So why would you remove the young almond crop before the almond core is formed? That is basically that you do not want to have a crop on a young tree, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it?
So my question is, why would you remove the developing fruit before the shell or the core is formed?
It's used for the dish. I'm not sure how is it.
Okay, so that's another use. Okay, so yes. What I'm getting into is here. Okay, so basically, if you remove by hand, that should not be a problem as long as you're not damaging the spurs and buds for the next year. In fact, what I'm thinking here is removing the young nuts from the tree might actually reduce the sink strength from the tree, right? And that might help the tree form more buds and provide more carbohydrate to the buds for next year. So it might actually, in fact, help next year's yield. So that is my take on it. As long as you're not damaging the buds or the plant when you're removing those, right? Okay. The next question is, how can we control Oxytheria funesta and Certotharia? So these are the insects that we do not have in California. I think in California, these are Mediterranean pests.
Yes, Mediterranean spotted chaffer, as I Googled it. And the name in English is that. So you don't have it?
No, we don't have this in California almonds. I have not seen that, and I haven't seen it. How do we protect orchard with insecticide if we have bees in the orchard in the case when we have these two pests? Okay. Yeah, that spraying the insecticide during the bees is a big one in California. We do not recommend any tank mixing, even with the softer. pesticides. We have the first insecticide sprays that we want to do is the peach twig borer. So we delay the pesticide applications because at bloom time, it's a big no. Even when you spray during nighttime when the bees are not active, the bees can still get poisoned through their water, sources of water, and then from the residual activity of that insecticide. So I don't, even the insect growth regulators that we have, I'm not sure this Mediterranean pest, if we have any insect growth regulator. We have a lot of insect growth regulator sprays that we do. They are also not recommended during the period when the bees are present.
Yeah, because as I know, insecticides that are used for Mediterranean spotted chaffer are applied when like the bees are pollinated the orchard. That's why. So we don't use no matter what insecticides we have.
So you apply during the bees activity?
Yeah, if they kind of collide, what do we do in that sense?
Oh, okay.
The timing.
And then how does that affect the bee activity?
Yep.
It does, right?
I would like to know if it does. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, either I will apply a really selective pesticide, or I would just try to find a longer term biological control solutions. So yeah, that is those would be my two ways to go. Okay, yeah, but that's interesting. I can actually look it up and see if anyone has experience with this pest. Okay.
Okay. And my third question would be that in Georgia right now, we have really high temperature, and in some time it will drop again. So we have kind of a danger that some like trees will bloom and then frost strikes. Is there any ways to kind of postpone the blooming process so that doesn't happen?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we are in the same situation in California. The winter season was warm, so that's why the trees pushed bloom, and then right after the bloom, this week the temperature again got to like below 10 degrees, below 5 degrees. So it's so you can actually delay the bloom a little bit, but not by a lot. It's not like you can delay the bloom by weeks, but I would say that keeping the soil moist throughout the dormancy period will actually prevent the trees from getting into a shock. So at least they will, if you have steady soil moisture throughout the season in the root zone, then the bloom will not be expressed all of a sudden, and bloom will not be that early. So here on our university campus, I was talking to my orchard manager yesterday, and there's a clear difference between one of the orchards had high soil moisture. All other orchards, they were stressed for water, and then we applied water. That orchard had some water going already through the month of January, and that orchard is the only orchard that is behind in terms of bloom. All the other orchards, they're really quick and early. So yeah, you can actually have some physiological impact by maintaining soil moisture. Oh, and then the frost protection, we are, you know, today and yesterday, we had, you know, a lot of people turning their water on for frost protection. If you have sprinkler irrigation, we all know that we can turn the sprinklers on and prevent the frost injury, right? So we create a good film of water on the soil surface, keep the soil moist. So that helps in creating a little bit warmth under the canopy. And then some growers also sprayed Cocide, which is a bacterial killer, bactericide. And that helps in controlling the Pseudomonas population, which is isonucleating bacteria. And if you keep the population of that bacteria under check, it can also prevent frost injury to some extent. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions?
Yes, I do.
Yes, please.
During blooming, which solution do you use as a fungicide? And impact on bees? Farmers try to avoid spraying during blooming because of bees. Could you elaborate on this? What else could we do?
So during the bloom time, we have to have the fungicide program. So we strongly recommend that fungicide does not contain any tank mix of insect growth regulator or insecticide applications. Okay, that's a strong recommendation that we do not use that. We cannot get away without a fungicide spray during the bloom time usually. So we have a fungicide program. What we recommend the growers is that based on the weather predictions, you do, you make a plan in January ahead of time. You make a fungicide plan and you make a full fungicide plan. Like if you have to do multiple applications, typically one application at pink bud to 5% bloom, not pink bud, like 5 to 20% bloom. And the second application at 80% to full bloom. And then the third application at petal fall. That is 3 major applications that's maximum that you need to do. And then any other application after 10 to 14 days, if the weather stays cool or rainy. Okay, so we develop a fungicide plan for the full season, for the full bloom and post-bloom season. Then depending on the weather, we take those from our list. We just strike them out that we do not need an early spray. For example, this year, the weather was good. We had that plan. We had 5 to 20% bloom spray listed, but we strike it out. Okay, we don't need this. The next spray, even if the weather is good, we need one spray at 80% to full bloom, because every year there are chances that peak time for infection. So we did 80% to full bloom spray. Now the next spray, petal fall spray, if the weather stays dry, we can again strike that out. But now the weather is wet. Now we got some rain and there is frost as well. So we are keeping that petal fall spray. And then the next thing is monitoring. Yeah.
During blooming, what are the chances that bees will be killed and these flowers will be damaged because we are using pressure to spray, right? What are the chances that these flowers do not drop?
Okay, So as long as the soil has good amount of moisture, the soil is not dry, and there are no other adverse conditions like frost damage, usually the almond bloom, they withstand the spray when we spray with an air blast aerofan sprayer. Okay, we have strong recommendations to actually do the sprays at night when the bees are not active, so they don't get sprayed straight on them. And the fungicide it takes only a couple of hours to dry on the leaves and on the bloom, or not on the leaves, on the bloom. Okay, so by the time the bees are active, we are not actively spraying the fungicides, so the bees are usually okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome. Okay. More questions?
It's not about this topic, but on our last meet, you didn't remember the exact number for potassium usage per kernel. Not per kernel, but calculating from kernel, like how much potassium we should apply. Could we see those numbers, the exact number?
Okay, I believe we discussed that, right? Potassium, I can pull up I listed the numbers, right? Let me go back. Here is the, okay, I pulled up this, let me find out and I'll. So this is the slide that I showed you. This is 76 kilogram of K. Here is new share. I think we discussed this slide, right? 76 kilograms of.
All right, right. But I had a question about like the difference between numbers, and I remember you told me that it was because we didn't calculate from K, but from K to O.
Yeah,
like from formula and not.
Right. So 92 kilograms per 1,000 kilogram kernel is the K2O. So that is actual K is 76 kilogram.
Yes, I think.
Right. Okay. You're welcome. Okay.
I have another question, if I may.
Sure.
Harvest, before harvest, on spraying, can you advise anything? Is it advisable, is it recommended to spray before harvest, a couple of days before harvest?
Okay. Now in California, we have strict regulations of pre-harvest intervals on the pesticide label. Okay. And I checked last time with the regulatory bodies. The pre-harvest interval, for example, if it's a vegetable, like if we are spraying tomatoes and the pre-harvest interval is 14 days, we spray the tomatoes and wait for 14 days, and then we pick the tomatoes and send to market, right? That's how it works. In case of almonds, we shake the crop first. So we shake the almonds down and they stay on the ground for a week to 10 days. And then we pick and send to the processor, right? So I asked this question to the ag commissioner in my county, that when do you actually consider harvest? do you consider the harvesting of almonds when we pick the almonds and send to the processor or the market? Or do you consider it harvested when you shake the trees? And they said that we consider it harvested when you shake the trees. Okay, so that is the harvesting time, shaking the trees as per our regulations. The European regulations might be a little more stricter than California, if not the same. So I would say that, you can check with the pre-harvest interval on the pesticide label, and then keep that in mind, because that is a serious regulatory issue. Other than that, I think, we have a robust spray program to control navel orange worm close to harvest. So we have to navigate that window where we can spray effectively, and we spray in the weeks harvest, keeping.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Any more questions?
If there are no more questions, then we can call it a day and say goodbye to Garrett. Let me ask another question, if I may.
Yes, please.
You mentioned that spraying with copper and copper application at large, if I remember it well, a recommendation is to have it done at night, right? Or in the evening, right? In general,
copper application
does that apply to any spraying or only copper?
No, I did not mention in terms of copper application. I mentioned that for fungicide applications, that we do this fungicide spray applications at night. And, in general, when the bees are active, I would not spray, because you are spraying a lot of droplets, and you can causing air movement, stronger disturbance through the orchard. So I would generally not spray any kind of application when the bees are active, because we don't want to disturb the bees, and we don't want to smother them with the droplets. So for that reason, I think, yeah, it's generally recommended to spray when the bees are not active, early in the morning or late at night.
Understood. If bees are not an issue, then what would be the timing of application?
If the bees are not an issue, then I think you can time your application based on the weather. The other considerations will be, is there rain coming? How much time does it take for your fungicide to dry, right? So you don't want to be spraying right before the rain. You have to give a couple of hours for the fungicide droplets to dry, so that it can be effective protection before the rains, right? So that situation.
Neither sun rays, negative impact of sun rays, any time of the day?
No, I don't think as of now, I don't think that the sun rays would have any effect. It can in fact help the spray dry quickly, as long as your wind speed is low. The spray is not going off target, so you have to be careful in spraying in high winds. So wind speed is low. The sunshine during the daytime, that is not a significant issue. I don't see any effect of that.
Understood.
Okay. All right, Livon.
Levan, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you for this interesting presentation, and we will meet you tomorrow. Thank
you so much, and we'll gather again at 7 p.m. tomorrow, as usual, and we'll have the last session with this very passionate man from this cycle, and I sincerely hope that we'll keep contact with Garrett and Vakhtang. Let me add, see you tomorrow. Let me add one thing. We did have questions on irrigation, and we added irrigation calculator, which is posted on our website. You can be guided with this information from our site. That's what I wanted to add. See you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.